He went to her door to apologize. That was the only reason he went. Just an apology. Long overdue, nothing more. But when the door opened, a child looked up at him, and the man felt the ground disappear beneath both feet at once. Because that face was his. Someone had hidden this child from him for 7 years, and the person who did it was the last person he ever would have suspected, his own mother. Hello friends, welcome. Before we begin our story, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Also, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, or somewhere else in the world? We would love to know. And when you finish watching, tell us one thing you learned from the video. The August heat in Atlanta sat on everything like a second skin. Heavy, thick, relentless. The kind that turns the air itself into something you have to push through. It pressed against the windows of the black SUV as it moved slowly down a quiet street in the West End neighborhood. The kind of street where front porches had rocking chairs on them, where somebody's grandmother grew tomatoes in clay pots by the front steps, and where children drew chalk lines on the sidewalk because the sidewalk belonged to them, and everyone understood that. Inside the car, Senator Marcus Devereux sat completely still. His jacket was folded on the seat beside him. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows. His eyes were fixed on a point somewhere past the windshield, past the street, past everything that could actually be seen. From the outside, Marcus looked like exactly what the world knew him to be. Tall, composed, deliberate. The kind of man who walked into a Senate chamber and made the room pay attention without raising his voice. At 41, he had already served 2 full terms representing Georgia. His name appeared on 3 pieces of landmark legislation. His face had been on the cover of 2 national magazines. His senior campaign advisor had once told a journalist, off the record, that Marcus Devereux was the most naturally gifted political mind she had encountered in 30 years of this work. She had not meant it as pure praise, and Marcus had understood that when he read it. But right now, inside this car, on this street, in this heat, Marcus Devereux looked like a man who was simply afraid. His driver, a steady and quiet man named Earl, who had worked for him for 9 years, glanced into the rearview mirror. "Senator, we've been sitting here close to 5 minutes." Marcus said nothing. Earl cleared his throat softly. "Want me to go around the block again?" "No." The word came out flat and hollow, like something that had been sitting in Marcus's chest for a long time and had finally grown tired of waiting there. Marcus looked out the window at the house. Number 31. Small, well-kept. Cream-colored siding with dark green shutters that had been recently painted, a wooden porch with 2 chairs and a small table between them. A wind chime near the door, copper-colored, turning slowly in a breeze that barely existed, and leaning against the porch railing, a child's bicycle. Red. Slightly too big for whoever wrote it. The way parents buy things with growing room built in. He had the address on a folded piece of paper in his shirt pocket. He had folded and unfolded it so many times over the past 2 weeks that the creases were beginning to separate. He reached in now, pulled it out, opened it carefully. Camille Owens. The name was written in his own handwriting, given to him by a private investigator he had quietly hired 6 weeks ago. A former federal investigator named Price, who charged a considerable sum and asked very few questions. Both qualities had been necessary. Camille Owens, his former campaign staffer. The woman who had quietly left his Senate office on a Friday afternoon 7 years ago without explanation, without a farewell, without even collecting the last 2 weeks of pay she was owed. The woman he had let go, not just let go. He convinced himself deliberately and efficiently that he had no reason to look for. Marcus folded the paper and returned it to his pocket. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose and closed his eyes. He told himself the reason he was here was straightforward. He had treated Camille badly, not cruelly, not in any way that the world would name or that a journalist would write about, but badly in the way that powerful people treat the people who work beside them without ever recognizing that they are doing it. He had spoken to her like she was a function and not a person. He had looked past her in rooms full of people whose names carried more political weight. He had never once, in all the months she worked alongside him, asked how she was doing and waited for the actual answer. And 3 years ago, And when his engagement to Victoria had quietly fallen apart, when the careful, photogenic, politically constructed relationship he had been building had finally collapsed in private, in a way the public never fully understood, Marcus had sat alone in his Atlanta townhouse for the first time in his adult life, with no campaign to plan and no event to perform at. In that silence, he had started moving through the inventory of people he had failed. Camille's face had come to him like a quiet knock on a door he thought he had sealed permanently. So here he was. Just an apology. That was all. He had told himself this clearly and repeatedly on the drive over. A simple acknowledgement from a man who had been given too much, too young, and had learned all the wrong lessons from it. He had not prepared himself for anything beyond that moment on the porch. He had not prepared himself for what was about to come through that screen door. Marcus opened the car door. The Atlanta heat hit him immediately. Absolute and physical, soaking through his shirt in seconds. Earl stepped out with the intent to follow, but Marcus raised one hand. He walked to the porch alone, up the 3 steps, knocked, waited. He knocked again. Then he heard footsteps inside. Light ones, careful. The kind that belong to someone who checks who is at the door before they commit to opening it. A pause. Then the screen door swung open. And there she was. Camille Owens, 7 years older than the last time he had seen her. Her hair natural now, pulled up loosely. Wearing a linen shirt, holding a dish towel the way people do when they have been interrupted mid-task and haven't thought to set it down. She looked at Marcus, and the color left her face so quickly and so completely that he thought for one genuine moment that she might fall forward. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Camille?" He kept his voice careful, steady. He had practiced the words. "I know this is unexpected. I'm not here to cause any trouble. I came because I owe you something. I never—" He stopped. Because behind Camille, further inside the house, he heard something. Small footsteps running. The light, committed sound of a child who has not yet learned to move quietly through the world because they have no reason to. And then a boy appeared at the hallway behind her. Is small, maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing a basketball jersey 2 sizes too large, holding a book in one hand. His face was open and bright with the specific curiosity that children carry before the world teaches them caution. He looked up at Marcus, and Marcus's entire body stopped working. Not slowed, stopped. Because the boy looking up at him had a face that Marcus recognized in the deepest, most unmanageable way possible. Those eyes, dark, wide-set, slightly too serious for a face that young. The same eyes Marcus had looked at in mirrors his entire life. That jaw, square, strong, the jaw his own father had passed to him, and that Marcus had always considered unremarkable until this exact moment. And above the boy's left eyebrow, a small birthmark, faint, oval-shaped. The precise size and location of the birthmark that Marcus's own mother had pointed to on his baby photographs and called her favorite thing about his face. Marcus reached up slowly and touched the identical mark above his own left eyebrow. The room around him, the heat, the porch, the wind chime turning, Earl waiting by the car, went completely, absolutely silent. The boy tilted his head and said in a small and curious voice, "Mom, who is that?" And Camille's reaction was not the reaction of a woman surprised by a former employer appearing unannounced. It was not awkwardness. It was not the mild discomfort of an unexpected visit from the past. It was pure, absolute, 7-year-old terror. She put her hand on the boy's shoulder, and her knuckles went white around the dish towel, and she said in a voice so low and controlled, it was almost frightening, "Go to your room, baby, right now." The boy looked between them once, twice with those serious eyes that were Marcus's eyes. Then he disappeared back into the house. Camille turned back. Their eyes met, and in that single moment, without one word spoken between them, Marcus felt the truth arrive in his chest like something dropped from a height, something that hit before you have time to prepare. He did the arithmetic without wanting to. The way the mind performs calculations, it has not been asked to perform. 7 years ago, Camille had left his office. The boy was 6, maybe 7 years old. Marcus's voice, when it finally came, was barely sound at all. "How old is he?" Camille said nothing. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were wet. She was gripping that dish towel like it was the only fixed point in the world. Camille, his voice cracked slightly on her name. How old is that boy? She took one step back and began to slowly close the screen door. You shouldn't have come here, Marcus. Camille? The door closed. The latch clicked. And Marcus Devereux, United States Senator, stood alone on a porch in the August heat with water that was not rain running down his face, and one single thought burning through everything else like a lit match held to paper. 6 years old, 6 or 7 years. He had been engaged to Victoria 7 years ago, had been deep in his second Senate campaign when Camille left, who had told himself he was relieved she was gone because her absence made the weight of what had happened between them easier to set down, had convinced himself she had simply found a better opportunity or moved back to her family in Savannah, had never looked for her, had never asked a single question, had buried that night, that specific, quiet, unmistakable night after the campaign fundraiser in Buckhead, after Victoria had flown to New York for a family function, after Marcus had sat alone at the hotel bar, feeling the specific loneliness of a man surrounded constantly by people who needed something from him, had buried it so deep inside himself that he had nearly convinced himself it had not happened the way he remembered. Nearly. Marcus turned and walked back to the car. Earl opened the door without a word, with the way a good driver does when he can see that his employer is somewhere the driver cannot follow. Marcus got in. The door closed. The heat continued outside the tinted windows, and Marcus sat in the back of that car in the silence, with one image burning behind his eyes. A small boy in an oversized jersey. That jaw. Those eyes. The birthmark above the left eyebrow that his mother had loved. Had he left behind a son? Earl started the engine. Marcus didn't tell him where to go. Because for the first time in a long time, the man who always knew his next move had absolutely no idea what it was. Earl drove in silence for several minutes before Marcus finally spoke. Take me home. The words came out quietly, too quietly, the kind of quiet that is not peace. The kind that happens when a person's mind is so loud on the inside that nothing is left for the surface. They drove through the Atlanta afternoon, past the Westview Cemetery where the old oak trees made the light come through in pieces, past a elementary school where a summer program was letting out, children in bright shirts spilling through the front doors, past a church marquee that read, "The truth will find its way out. Prepare for it." Marcus looked at that sign as they passed it, and for the first time in his public life, a church marquee made him feel something close to guilt. The townhouse was exactly as he had left it that morning. Clean, minimal, to professionally maintain. The home of a man whose life had been organized entirely around a career and who had never quite gotten around to filling the space with anything that wasn't functional. Marcus walked through the front door, set his jacket over a chair, and went directly to his study. He sat at his desk. He did not open his laptop. He did not check his phone, which had been buzzing since the car. He sat in the silence of his own house and let himself think. On the corner of his desk was a framed photograph. His mother, Eleanor Devereux, taken at his first inauguration. She was wearing a wine-colored dress and the expression she always wore at public events, composed, dignified, the face of a woman who understood that everything was being watched and had made peace with performing under observation her entire adult life. Because she was 71 now. She still attended every significant event in his career. She still called him every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock without fail. Marcus looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he put it face down on the desk. He leaned back in his chair and let his mind go to the place he had kept locked for 7 years. It had been a fundraiser, one of those enormous, glittering Atlanta events where money moved through the room in all directions and everyone smiled at everyone else and called it community. The kind of event Marcus had attended 100 times. The kind where he was always the most important person present and always felt underneath the performance entirely alone. Victoria had not been there. Once she'd flown to New York 2 days before for her sister's engagement dinner. A trip that had been on the calendar for months, a trip Marcus had actively encouraged because their relationship, even then, even before the engagement had officially ended, had already developed the kind of composed, photogenic distance that neither of them was willing to name out loud. They had been together for 4 years, 4 years of perfect appearances and carefully coordinated events in a relationship that looked exactly right from every angle, except the one that actually counted. Marcus had gone to the fundraiser alone. He had stayed later than necessary, not because he was enjoying himself, but because going home to the empty townhouse had seemed, that particular night, worse than staying somewhere loud. Camille had been there in her capacity as deputy campaign coordinator. She had been with his operation for 8 months by then. Quiet, precise, completely reliable, the kind of staff member whose absence you would notice immediately and whose presence you somehow always took for granted. Late in the evening, he had stepped out to a smaller room to take a phone call that turned out to be nothing, and Camille had come to find him with a message from the campaign manager. She had delivered it. He had thanked her. And then, instead of going back to the main room, she had paused and said in that direct, undecorated way she had, "Are you actually all right tonight, Senator? You look like someone who wants to be anywhere else." Not the professional version of the question, not the polished concern that staff were trained to display, were the genuine version, the human one. And Marcus, who had not been asked that question with real care in longer than he could remember, had looked at her and said simply, "No, not tonight." From that small, honest answer, something had opened. A conversation that went longer than it should have. Two people in a quiet room at the edge of a loud party, one of them powerful and lonely and not performing for once, and one of them simply decent enough to ask the real question. What came after was not planned by either of them. It was the kind of thing that happens once in a specific moment between two specific people and is never repeated and never fully explained. The kind of thing that feels necessary in the moment and enormous in the morning. And when Marcus woke the next day with the full weight of what had happened pressing down on him, he had done what powerful, frightened men do. He had retreated, not with cruelty, not with accusation, but with the specific cowardice of distance. He had treated Camille with professional correctness that was designed to erase what had existed between them. Not unkind, simply absent. The way you remove a person from your awareness when their presence makes you confront something you are not ready to face. And 6 weeks later, she was gone. Marcus opened his eyes. He looked at the space where his mother's photograph had been, and something cold and specific moved through him. Because Camille had not looked surprised to see him in a simple way. No, she had not reacted the way someone reacts when an unexpected face from the past appears at their door. She had reacted like someone who had been dreading a specific knock for a very long time. Like she had rehearsed for it, prepared for it, hoped it would never come, and built a life on the assumption that it wouldn't. And the way she had moved the boy back into the house, the speed of it, the precision, that was not the reflex of a woman hiding something inconvenient. That was the reflex of a woman who had been protecting something for years and had never stopped being ready to protect it. Marcus reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. Price, the investigator. He picked up his phone, dialed, 2 rings. "Mr. Devereux." The voice on the other end was unhurried. "I need you to do something more for me." A short pause. "Of course. I need everything there is to find on Camille Owens, where she went when she left Atlanta, who helped her, who paid for anything." A slightly longer silence. "And Price." "Yes, sir." Marcus's voice dropped. "I need to know if anyone in my immediate circle knew she was leaving, anyone who may have been involved in facilitating it." He ended the call. He put the phone down. Outside, the Atlanta evening was settling in, still warm, the light going gold over the city. And Marcus Devereux sat in his study with one thought circling everything else, quiet at first, then louder. His mother had always known everything that happened in his life before he knew it himself, had always said so, had considered it a point of pride. He went back the next morning. He had told himself he wasn't going to. Not yet. Not without more information. Not without knowing what he was actually walking toward. He had also told himself the boy's face would stop appearing every time he closed his eyes. He had been wrong about that, so he went. No Earl this time. He drove himself in an unremarkable rental car that did not announce anything about him. He parked down the street and walked. The morning was cooler. The neighborhood was waking up. Someone was watering their front garden. 2 older men were talking on a corner. Somewhere, a radio was playing something gospel-flavored and full of certainty. Marcus knocked on the green shuttered door. Camille opened it almost immediately. She had been up for hours, he could tell. Dressed, controlled. Her expression when she saw him moved through 4 emotions in under 2 seconds and landed on something carefully flat. "I told you to leave." "I know." Marcus did not move from the step. "I'm not leaving, Camille. Not until you answer one question." She crossed her arms. "Then will you go?" "Then I'll go." She waited. "How old is he?" Marcus asked. Something shifted in her expression. A small, almost imperceptible softening, like she had been prepared for a harder question and this one had surprised her slightly. 7, she said quietly. Marcus felt the number land in the center of his chest. 7 years old. Yes. What month was he born? Her jaw tightened. She looked away toward the street, toward the man watering his garden, toward anywhere that was not Marcus's face. April, she said, barely above a whisper. April. He counted backward without wanting to. April, meaning she would have been pregnant in July, 7 months after the fundraiser. He took one step closer. Camille, please look at me. Slowly she turned, and the expression on her face when she did was not anger. It was not guilt. It was something far more complicated and far more human than either of those things. It was the face of a woman who had carried something extraordinarily heavy for an extraordinarily long time, who had carried it so long that she had stopped remembering what it felt like to put it down. Is he mine? Marcus whispered. The question sat in the morning air between them, and Camille Owen said absolutely nothing, but her eyes filled slowly with tears, and that was the loudest answer Marcus had ever received in his life. He drove home in silence. His hands on the steering wheel were not entirely steady. He kept seeing the boy's face, and somewhere in the corner of his mind, beneath the shock, beneath the guilt, beneath 7 years of not knowing what he had not known, a name was forming. He didn't know where it came from. Something glimpsed on a drawing near the door, or heard in a tone of voice, or assembled from details he hadn't consciously registered. But the name sat in his mind with the weight of something permanent. Noah. His son. His son. Those 2 words were so large that his mind could not contain them inside ordinary thought. They simply floated there, enormous and completely real, colliding with everything else he believed about his own life. He had a son who was 7 years old. A son who had grown up in a house with green shutters and a red bicycle, and a mother who held a dish towel like a shield. A son who had grown up without him. And Marcus, who had sat alone in his townhouse for 3 years, telling himself the hollow feeling in his chest was simply the cost of ambition, suddenly understood that the hollow feeling had been there long before he was alone. He pulled over on Cascade Road next to a row of shops just opening for the morning. He sat with both hands flat on the steering wheel. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Marcus Devereux, senator, public man, the person whose composure other people relied on, pressed his forehead against his hands and let his shoulders shake. Not for long. He was too practiced in control for long. But for one moment, irreal and unmanaged and completely private, he let himself feel all of it. 7 years. 7 years of his son's life that he had not been present for. First words, first steps, first day of school, every scraped knee and every bad dream, and every morning that Noah had woken up and looked across the breakfast table and seen only his mother, because his father had not known he existed. Or had he? Marcus lifted his head. He wiped his face. And a new thought, cold, sharp, precise, moved slowly through everything else. He had not known. He was certain of that. He had not known about the pregnancy. He had not known about the boy. But the question he had asked Price last night sat up straight inside him now. Had anyone else known? Because Camille had worked on his campaign, had been inside the operation for months. In when the campaign had been run, in large part, from his mother's house on Habersham Road. Eleanor Devereux, who had co-chaired 3 of his fundraisers, who knew every member of his staff by name and by history, who had once told Marcus over Sunday dinner, in that quiet and absolute way of hers, I know everything that happens around you, Marcus, before you know it yourself. That is how I keep you safe. Marcus had smiled at the time. He was not smiling now. His phone buzzed. A message from Price. Found something significant. Available when you are. Marcus stared at those words. Then he typed back, 1 hour, and drove. Price worked from a second-floor office above a tax preparation business indicator. No sign on the door. The kind of address you only found if someone handed it to you directly, which was exactly the arrangement Price preferred. Marcus climbed the stairs and knocked twice. The door opened immediately. Price was a compact, unremarkable-looking man in his late 50s, with gray at the temples and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He had the kind of face that was immediately forgettable, which Marcus understood was a professional asset. He stepped aside to let Marcus in. The office was ordered in the specific way of someone who works with information. Not clean exactly, but organized. Every surface had material on it. Every piece of material had a location. A corkboard on one wall was covered in documents connected by colored thread. Marcus sat across from the desk. Price sat opposite him, folded his hands, and looked at Marcus with the expression of a man who had delivered difficult news many times and had long ago made a kind of peace with the discomfort it caused other people. I want to start by saying, Price began carefully, that I moved faster on this than usual, because what I found in the first hours told me you needed to know quickly. Marcus said nothing. He simply looked at him steadily. Price opened a folder and turned it around. On top was a photograph. Camille, younger, standing outside an apartment building in Buckhead. Below it was a document, a lease agreement. That apartment, Price said, tapping the image, was rented for Camille Owens approximately 7 years and 2 months ago. The lease was paid in full, 12 months up front, in cash. You routed through a property management company. Marcus looked at the document. Then his eyes moved to the name at the top of the payment record. He read it once, read it again, because the first time, his mind had refused to process it. The payment had been traced through a family trust, a trust that Marcus recognized, a trust that had been established by his father decades ago, and that was now managed entirely by his mother. Marcus looked up slowly. Price was watching him. There's more, Price said quietly. He reached into the folder and produced a second document, a wire transfer record. $40,000 sent to an account in Camille Owens' name 7 years ago, 2 weeks before she left the campaign. Marcus stared at the number. $40,000 to a campaign staffer who had been earning $52,000 a year. She was paid to leave, Marcus said. His voice was completely level. Yes, and the apartment was to make sure she went somewhere he would never have reason to look. Price nodded once, and stayed gone. Marcus leaned back. The room around him felt slightly tilted. Not in any physical way. In the way a room feels when the story you have been living inside turns out to have an entirely different plot than the one you thought you were reading. Did my mother know about the pregnancy? He asked. Price's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He looked at Marcus with the careful attention of a man choosing his footing on uncertain ground. Mr. Devereux, what I'm about to tell you now is the part I needed to make sure you were seated for. Marcus felt something cold at the back of his neck. Aaron, the $40,000, Price said quietly, did not come from a campaign account. It came from the family trust. A pause, which your mother controls exclusively. A longer pause. And the apartment was arranged through a property manager your mother has used personally for over 15 years. The words arrived in the room like something dropped onto a hard floor. She knew, Marcus said. Yes. She didn't just find out. Marcus's voice was precise and controlled in the way that things are controlled when the alternative is the opposite of control. She arranged it. The documentation suggests she moved quickly, Price said carefully. Within 2 weeks of Camille leaving the campaign, everything was in place. The apartment, the payment, the powers arrangement. Marcus stood up, not dramatically, slowly. The way a person stands when their body needs to move, because staying still has become physically impossible. He walked to the small window of Price's office and stood with his back to the room. Outside, Decatur was going about its Tuesday. A woman pushing a stroller, 2 college students with backpacks, a delivery truck double parked outside a restaurant. Everyone in the ordinary forward motion of a day that did not know it was the day that Marcus Devereux's entire understanding of the last 7 years had quietly come apart. Mr. Devereux, Price's voice was gentle. I verified this through 3 independent sources before I contacted you. I don't bring a man this kind of information unless I am certain. Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then, my mother. Does she know I've been looking? No. I was extremely careful. Marcus turned around. His face was composed now. Frighteningly composed. The particular composure that is not peace. The kind that comes after the shaking stops, but the ground is still entirely destroyed. Is there anything else? Price hesitated for just a moment. Then he reached into the folder one final time and produced a printed copy of an email. Old. The formatting was from an older system. He placed it on the desk and turned it to face Marcus. Marcus read it again. The cold thing at the back of his neck spread across his entire body. The email was from his mother to the property manager, 7 years ago, 3 months after Camille had left Atlanta. Short, direct. The way his mother wrote everything, it read, "She is settled. The child will be born in the spring. No contact is to be made or facilitated. Marcus must never know. The family cannot survive this story, and neither can his career. This is handled. Do not raise it again." Marcus read it 3 times. Each time, he hoped the words would rearrange themselves into something different. They did not. His mother had known about the pregnancy, had known there was a child, his child, and she had paid Camille $40,000 and placed her in an apartment across the city and made sure, carefully and completely, that Marcus never had any reason to go looking. And then she had watched him run for re-election, had sat beside him at press events, had called him every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, had attended every significant moment of his career with that composed, wine-colored dress expression. And she had carried this inside her chest, a perfectly sealed for 7 years. Marcus picked up the email from the desk, folded it once, put it in his shirt pocket. "Thank you, Price." He walked to the door, paused. "Does anyone else know you've been looking into this?" "No one," Price said. "I was careful." Marcus nodded once and walked back down the stairs into the ordinary unknowing street. He did not go to see his mother that day. He wanted to. There was a version of that afternoon where Marcus drove directly to the house on Habersham Road and placed the printed email on the kitchen table, where she drank her morning coffee and watched her face rearrange itself from composure into the specific ugliness that appears when someone who has hidden something for a long time is finally completely exposed. He wanted that badly, but he didn't go. Now, because the fury inside him, as real and as total as it was not the most urgent thing. The most urgent thing was a boy, 7 years old, red bicycle, an oversized basketball jersey, that birthmark, a boy who had spent every year of his life without his father. If Marcus walked into that situation carrying the full weight of his rage at his mother, at the calculated patience of what she had done, he would break everything. He knew himself well enough to know that, so he went home instead. He sat in his study. He did not look at the space where his mother's photograph had been. He sat with everything he now knew and let it settle inside him the way sediment settles after water has been disturbed. Slowly, heavily into a new configuration. His mother had known he had a son. His mother had paid that son's mother to disappear. His mother had then sat beside him year after year at every Sunday morning phone call, at every campaign event, at every public and private moment, and had carried that secret in her perfectly composed, perfectly controlled chest. And she had never given Marcus the chance to know. Never given Noah the chance to have a father. Marcus pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. He stayed that way for a long time. When he lowered them, his face was dry and his jaw was set, and something inside him had shifted. Something that felt, beneath all the grief and fury and disbelief, surprisingly close to clarity. He went back to Camille's house on a Saturday morning. The heat had broken slightly overnight, and the West End street looked different in the softer morning. Warmer, more inhabited. Someone had a sprinkler running in their front yard. A group of children were at the end of the block, negotiating something elaborate with a basketball. Marcus walked up the 3 porch steps and knocked. Camille opened the door. When she saw him, her expression moved through the same rapid sequence it always did now. The flash of fear, the hardening, the careful neutrality settling over the top of it all, like a lid placed over something still warm. "I know about the money," Marcus said quietly. "I know about the apartment. I know about the trust account." He watched her face. "And I know about the email." What he saw in her expression then was not the face of a woman caught. It was the face of a woman who had been waiting for 7 years for a weight to shift. Her eyes closed. Her shoulders came down slightly. She stepped back from the door. An invitation. Marcus walked inside. The house was small, but it was not diminished. It was the home of someone who had worked to make something good out of whatever was available. Books on a shelf, a house plant doing well in the front window, and on the wall beside the hallway, a collection of a child's drawings pinned up carefully. Animals, vehicles, one that appeared to be a very ambitious attempt at the Atlanta skyline from the perspective of someone who had studied it from a car window. Marcus looked at the drawings for longer than he intended to. Camille came from the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee she had not asked if he wanted and set them on the small table between 2 chairs. They sat. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Camille spoke first. Her voice was level. The voice of someone telling a story they have rehearsed in their own minds so many times it has lost its sharpest edges. "She called me to meet her," Camille said. "Your mother, at her house. I thought it was about the campaign. A scheduling issue. Something minor." A pause. "I didn't understand how she knew. I had barely admitted it to myself." Marcus listened. She was completely calm. That was the thing that frightened me most. She was not angry. She was not raising her voice. Camille looked down at the cup in her hands. "She explained to me very quietly that I had 2 options." Marcus's chest tightened. "Option 1, I leave Atlanta. She arranges a place for me to go, covers my expenses for a year, ensures I'm stable. In return, I make no claim, I make no contact, and I raise the child entirely on my own." Camille's voice remained even, but her hands tightened around the cup. "Option 2, she goes to the campaign's legal team that afternoon. She makes certain the story that gets told about me is the story she chooses to tell, and she ensures I never work in Georgia politics again. Ever." The room was very quiet. "I had nothing, Marcus." Her voice stayed level, but the effort it took was visible. "No political family, no connections, no safety net. I was 29 years old and I was carrying a child who was going to need all the things I didn't have." She looked up at him directly. "So I took the money and I left." Marcus looked at the floor between them. "And I have regretted it," Camille said. The word came out slightly worn at the edges, like something that had been handled too many times. "And every day, not because of the money, I would have left that on her table without a second thought if I had believed for one moment that you would have chosen differently, that you would have looked at me and chosen to be present." She held his gaze. "But I had watched you for 8 months, Marcus. I knew the life you were building. I knew what it needed to look like. And I knew that I could not be in that picture. So I told myself Noah would be fine, that I would be enough." She looked toward the child's drawings on the wall. "And for a long time I believed that. He is a wonderful boy. He is funny and stubborn and clever, and he reads everything he can put his hands on, and he has never, not once, given me a reason to be anything but proud." Her voice caught slightly on the last sentence. Just slightly. "But lately he has started asking questions. About his father. About why he doesn't have one. About whether his father knows about him." She pressed her lips together for a moment. "And I have run out of answers that don't break his heart." The room held that sentence for a long moment. "I will not tell my son," Camille said quietly, "that his father chose to leave. That is the one thing I have never been willing to take from him." Marcus looked at her steadily. "I want to meet him properly," he said. "I want him to know who I am." Camille studied him carefully. "That is not a small thing. You cannot walk into a 7-year-old boy's life and walk back out when it becomes difficult. That will do more damage than never appearing at all. I know that. Do you?" She looked at him without apology. "Because you have a Senate seat and a public life and people who watch everything you do. And Noah is not a political situation to manage. He is not a narrative. He is a child. Camille." His voice was firm, not harsh. Firm. the voice of a man who needs to be understood. I am not here because it is convenient. I am here because that boy is my son, and I have already lost 7 years I will never recover. I am not going to lose another day. She looked at him for a long time, the kind of look that takes a full measurement of a person. Then she stood up, walked to the bottom of the stairs, and called up, "Noah, come down, please. There's someone I need you to meet properly." A pause, the sound of something being set down, a book probably, from the particular silence that preceded it. Then footsteps on the stairs, a light and quick and completely unaware of the magnitude of what was waiting at the bottom. Marcus stood up. He pressed his palms flat against his thighs to steady his hands. He had walked into rooms with 100 hostile faces. He had delivered speeches in front of packed arenas. He had stood at podiums where the wrong word could end a career. None of it had made his hands unsteady. But as those small footsteps came down the stairs toward him, he could not make his hands be still. Noah appeared at the bottom of the stairs, the oversized jersey again, hair slightly disheveled, a book tucked under one arm, a chapter book well worn at the spine. He looked at Marcus with those dark, wide-set, serious eyes. And Marcus looked back at him and said absolutely nothing, because no amount of preparation could have made him ready for this. For the specific, overwhelming, entirely physical recognition of looking at a person and seeing yourself, not in a surface way, not in the casual way that people note family resemblance at reunions, but in a deep way, a way that bypassed every composed and controlled part of him and went straight to somewhere fundamental. Noah tilted his head slightly. "You came back," he said simply. Marcus swallowed. "Yes." Noah considered this. "Mom said you used to work together." "That's right." The boy looked at him with an expression that was simultaneously childlike and ancient, the expression of someone who has been thinking about something for a while and has arrived at the conversation with prepared questions. "So why are you here now?" The question landed in the room with the clean, undecorated weight that only children can produce. Not polite small talk. Not the social performance that adults use to avoid what they actually mean. Just, "Why are you here now?" Marcus looked at Camille. She gave him a look that said, "This part is yours. I cannot do it for you." He looked back at Noah. He crouched down, not all the way to his knees, but low enough to bring himself to the boy's level. Low enough to make what came next feel like a conversation between equals and not a pronouncement from above. "Because I should have come a long time ago," Marcus said, "and I'm sorry that I didn't." Noah looked at him steadily for a long time, the way children look at people, fully, without the social training that teaches adults to glance away. Then he said, "Are you going to go away again?" The simplicity of it, the pure, undecorated directness of 7 years old. It hit Marcus somewhere so completely off guard that for a moment he genuinely could not speak, because the honest and complete answer was complicated. The honest answer involved his mother and Price's folder and a dark car that had appeared outside this house 2 nights ago, and the people who would respond poorly when they understood what Marcus intended to do. But he looked at this boy with his face and his eyes and his birthmark. This boy who had spent 7 years asking questions that no one could fully answer, and he said the only thing that was absolutely irreversibly true. "No." Noah studied him for one more long moment. Then he nodded once, with the gravity of someone who has made a decision. "Okay," he said simply, and turned toward the kitchen. Pause, looked back. "Have you eaten breakfast?" Despite everything, despite every single thing pressing down on him, Marcus almost smiled. "Not yet." "Mom made too much," Noah said. "She always makes too much." "Come on." And he walked to the kitchen. Marcus looked at Camille. Something passed between them. Not warmth yet, not with everything still this raw and this recent, but something, an understanding, a fragile, careful, brand new beginning. 2 blocks away, a dark car sat with its engine off. Inside it, a man had his phone to his ear. His voice was low. "He went inside," the man said. A pause. "Yes, he's been there over an hour." Another pause, longer. "Understood. What do you want me to do?" The answer came through the phone. The man nodded slowly, his eyes on the cream-colored house with the green shutters. "Count, I'll handle it," he said. He ended the call, started the engine, and drove away. Upstairs, in a kitchen that smelled like eggs and toast and Saturday morning, a senator sat at a small table across from a 7-year-old boy who was explaining with great professional seriousness that the correct way to eat scrambled eggs was with hot sauce and not ketchup, and that anyone who said otherwise was wrong, and that this was simply a fact. And neither of them knew that outside the clock had already started, and that the people who had spent 7 years making sure this moment never happened had just found out that it had. The scrambled eggs were, as advertised, excellent. Noah ate with the focused efficiency of a child who has things to do afterward and treats meals as a logistical step rather than an event. He ate and he talked simultaneously about a book he was reading, about a disagreement he'd had with a classmate about something Marcus couldn't quite follow, about a bird that had been sitting on the porch railing every morning for a week and that Noah had decided was the same bird each time based on a specific marking on its wing. Marcus listened. He asked questions. He was good at asking questions. It was in many ways the most useful skill his career had given him. But this was different from any interview or constituent meeting he had ever conducted. This required nothing from him except attention, and he found to something that felt like surprise that attention was the easiest thing he had given anyone in years. Camille moved around the kitchen, refilling coffee, and not joining the conversation but present in it, adding a word here, correcting a detail there, with the fluid ease of someone who had been the entire world for this child for 7 years and had learned every register of his communication. When Noah finished eating, he looked at Marcus with a new expression, still assessing, but something slightly different in it, something that had shifted incrementally during the meal. "Can you come back?" the boy asked. "Yes," Marcus said. "When?" "When would you like me to?" Noah considered this with genuine seriousness, as though evaluating a business proposal. "Saturdays are good," he said finally. "I don't have school and Mom doesn't work on Saturdays anymore." "Saturdays," Marcus agreed. "And maybe sometimes Sundays," Noah added, as if extending a small concession. Maybe sometimes Sundays," Marcus said. Noah nodded. Agreement reached. Then he stood, picked up his plate, carried it to the sink. Marcus noted the automatic nature of it, the habit, and said without looking back, "I'm going to read for a while," and walked out of the kitchen. Camille sat down across from Marcus with her second cup of coffee. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the morning was fully underway. "He likes you," she said. The words carried a mild surprise, and also not any surprise at all. "He's remarkable," Marcus said, and he meant it in a way that went somewhere deeper than a compliment. Camille looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said simply. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and wrote his cell number on the back of a small card. He held it across the table. She took it. Their fingers didn't touch, but the act of it, the handing over of a number, the small signal of willingness, the fragile acknowledgement that something real was beginning, sat in the air between them with a weight they both felt. "Camille," he paused, "I'm going to go see my mother." Her expression changed immediately, the ease of the last hour gone, something careful and watchful taking its place. "Carefully," she said. The word was not a request, it was a warning. "I know. Because if you go at it the wrong way," she stopped, looked toward the doorway where Noah had disappeared, lowered her voice. "Those people have more to lose than you understand right now, and people with a great deal to lose are capable of unpredictable things." Marcus looked at her steadily. "I understand more than you think." She studied him. Then she nodded once. "In a Saturday," she said. "Saturday," he confirmed. He walked down the 3 porch steps, through the gate, down the block to his car, and as he drove, he did not see the dark vehicle that pulled slowly from a side street half a block behind him, following at a patient distance, like something that had been waiting a long time and had finally decided that waiting was over. Senator Devereux's house on Habersham Road was the kind of home that had hosted governors, had hosted fundraisers that moved significant money, had hosted Sunday dinners that shaped political decisions in ways that never appeared in any official record. It was a beautiful house. Marcus had grown up in it. He had believed for the entirety of his life that everything that had ever happened within its walls had been in his best interest. When he had called ahead this time, his mother had answered on the second ring, as she always did, and had said simply, "Come for lunch," as if this were any Sunday, as if there were nothing unusual in his voice at all. She was in the garden when he arrived, tending something in the flower bed along the south wall, wearing the garden gloves his father had given her years before he died, the ones she refused to replace. She stood when she heard the gate. She looked at his face, and Marcus, who had watched Price's documentation describe in clinical and completely verified detail everything she had done, saw something move across his mother's expression in that single moment of eye contact. Something very brief, something she had not intended to show. She knew why he was here. She had known this day was possible, had perhaps always known, in the way people know the things they have buried deep but not destroyed, that it existed as a future probability. And now it had arrived in her garden on a Saturday in August wearing her son's face. "Marcus," she said. Her voice was exactly as it always was. He reached into his shirt pocket and placed the printed email on the garden wall beside her, smooth flat, facing up. She looked at it. She did not touch it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she took off her garden gloves and set them down carefully and said, in that quiet and absolute voice, "Come inside." They sat in the front room, the room where she had hosted everyone, where the furniture had not changed since Marcus was in college, where the light came through the tall windows at an angle that had been the background of every important conversation in his life. Marcus waited. His mother sat straight in her chair. She folded her hands in her lap. She was, he understood in that moment, genuinely sorry. Not in the simple way, in the complicated way of a person who had made a calculation she believed was correct and had lived with it for 7 years and had perhaps begun, somewhere in the last few years, to understand that the calculation had been wrong. Or not wrong exactly, but at a cost she had not fully priced. "I did what I believed was necessary," she said. Her voice was steady, not defensive. Steady in the way of someone who has rehearsed this conversation in their own mind for years and has arrived at a version of it they can hold. "You were 2 months from a Senate campaign that you needed to win. The story, if it had come out, a staffer, unmarried, yes, during an engagement." "Stop." Marcus's voice was quiet. "I know the reasoning, Mother. I do not need you to explain the reasoning." She stopped. "I need you to understand something." His voice did not rise. It never rose this late in a conversation. It only got quieter and more precise. "I have a son. His name is Noah. He is 7 years old and he has spent every year of his life without me. Not because I made that choice, because you made it for me, without asking, without telling me, without giving me the chance to know." His mother's hands tightened slightly in her lap. "You sat beside me for 7 years," Marcus continued. "Every event, every Sunday, every campaign. And you knew there was a boy in this city who was mine, who had my face, who was growing up asking questions you had made it impossible for me to answer. And you never said a word. I was protecting," she began. "You were protecting the career," Marcus said. "Not me. The career. There is a difference, and you know there is." She was silent. "I am going to acknowledge Noah formally and legally as my son," Marcus said. "Publicly, completely. His name will be known. His existence will be known. There is no version of what happens next where that does not happen." Something shifted behind his mother's eyes. Not surprise, she had known this was the likely conclusion. But something, a kind of grief perhaps, at what acknowledgement would cost, at the story that would be told about her. "The press will," she began. "I know what the press will do," Marcus said. "I know what this costs me professionally. Now I have thought about it carefully and completely, and it changes nothing." Marcus, her voice was, for the first time in the conversation, not steady. "I love you. Everything I did because I know you love me." He said it without warmth and without coldness. Just the plain truth of it, complicated and complete. "I know that, and it makes it harder, Mother. Not easier. It makes it harder." She looked at him, and in that moment, for the first time in as long as Marcus could remember, his mother looked old. Not in a physical way, in the way people look when they are finally carrying the full weight of something they have been holding at arm's length. "I would like you," Marcus said quietly, standing, "to think very carefully about whether you would like the chance to know your grandson, because that is what is possible now. If that door is still open," he paused, "but it requires you to sit in that boy's presence, knowing what you did and being accountable for it, not to me, to him, if and when he is old enough to understand, and I will leave that to you to sit with." He picked up the email from the garden wall as he left. He folded it, put it back in his pocket. He drove home, and that evening he called his attorney. The legal acknowledgement moved quickly once Marcus's attorney filed the formal documentation. Eleanor Devereux did not contest it. There were no counterfilings. The dark car outside Camille's house disappeared the morning after Marcus's attorney delivered a formal notice to his mother's legal counsel. The press coverage was real and it was not comfortable. A cable news network ran the story for 2 days straight. Now there were photographers outside Marcus's townhouse. Several political commentators raised questions about what the revelation meant for his Senate seat. Marcus did not read the coverage. He had decided not to. But one of his staffers sent him a single screenshot, a quote from a political columnist he respected, that said, "Whatever one thinks of the circumstances, Devereux's public acknowledgement of his son is an act of unusual political courage. It costs him something, and he did it anyway." Marcus looked at that sentence for a moment. Then he set his phone down and drove to the West End. The DNA confirmation came through on a Thursday. Marcus already knew what it would say. He had known from the moment he looked into a boy's face in a screen doorway on an August morning. But he read it anyway. He sat at his desk and he read the clinical language and the percentages and the absolute confirmation that carried no room for doubt. He closed his laptop. He called Camille. "It came," he said. "I know," she said. "Your attorney called." A pause. The phone line held both of them for a moment. "Marcus." She stopped. "I know," she said quietly. She knew what he wanted to say. The apology that was also a gratitude, that was also a recognition of everything she had carried that he hadn't. "I know," she said again, and somehow that was enough. The formal legal acknowledgement was signed 26 days later. Marcus signed the documents at his desk with a steady hand. Noah James Owens Devereux, formally, legally, completely recognized as the son of Marcus Devereux. That evening, Marcus drove to the West End. He knocked on the door. Camille opened it and read his face and stepped back to let him in. Noah was in the sitting room, cross-legged on the floor with a book. He looked up. "It's not Saturday," the boy said. "No," Marcus agreed. Noah looked at his face the way he always did, fully, without apology. "Is it done?" Marcus nodded. Noah looked at him for a moment. Then he looked back at his book. "Okay," he said, and turned a page. And Marcus stood in the sitting room of the small house with the green shutters and felt something he did not have a precise word for. Something larger than relief and quieter than joy and more permanent than both. The weeks that followed were not simple. Real things rarely are. There were difficult days. Days when Noah went quiet in the particular way that told Marcus he was working through the years that were gone. Days when Marcus drove home from the West End and sat in his townhouse feeling the distance between the two worlds he now moved between. Days when he and Camille looked at each other across the kitchen table with all the history sitting between them like a guest that wasn't leaving. But Marcus came back, every time. Through the difficult evenings and the questions without clean answers, and the moments when Noah tested him the way children test the people they are beginning to trust, pushing to find what it takes to make someone leave. He didn't leave. He came on Saturdays, then Sundays, then Wednesday evenings, when Noah called with something he had read and wanted to talk about. He helped with homework at the kitchen table. He fixed the front porch step that had been creaking since before he'd ever knocked on the door. When he learned how Camille took her coffee without asking, by paying attention. He was not trying to replace anything. He was simply there, consistently and without drama, and slowly the way a child slowly moves toward warmth without deciding to. Simply because the warmth is reliably, consistently there, Noah began to move. The moment Marcus had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting for it came on an ordinary Saturday afternoon in the 4th month. They were in the backyard. Marcus had, over several quiet visits, cleared the overgrown section along the back fence and relaid the paving stones so they sat level. Noah was riding his bicycle in careful loops around the yard, fast with the focused intensity of someone who has decided this is training even though nothing is being trained for. Marcus was sitting on the back step watching him. The afternoon light was the particular gold of Atlanta in October, the kind that makes everything look like it has been considered carefully. Noah looped past, came around again, slowed, stopped, stood with one foot on the ground, looked at Marcus, and on his face was something Marcus had not seen before. Not the measuring, not the careful assessment of someone deciding whether to trust. Something from the other side of that, the place you arrive at after you've measured something long enough and found it to be exactly what it said it was. "Dad," Noah said. Just that. Not a question, not a statement being placed carefully in the room to see how it landed. Just the word. Easy, natural. Like it had been there all along and had simply been waiting for the right moment to come out. Marcus looked at him. Something in his chest did something complicated. "Yeah," he said. His voice came out rough at the edges. Noah tilted his head. "Come ride with me." He held out one handlebar toward the empty space beside him. "You can balance on the back." Marcus looked at the bicycle. It was a child's bicycle. He was a 6-foot, 41-year-old man who had not been on a bicycle since college. "Noah," he said seriously, "that bicycle is not going to hold both of us." Noah grinned, and it was the first time Marcus had seen it. A full, open, completely unguarded grin. Not the controlled little smile the boy allowed himself when something was mildly acceptable. Not the slight curl of amusement when something was amusing. A real one, bright and sudden and entirely his own. "Try," Noah said. Marcus stood up. He walked across the yard, gripped the back of the bicycle seat, attempted to balance his considerable adult weight on the back of something designed for a child who weighed 60 pounds. Noah pushed off. The bicycle wobbled spectacularly. Both of them made sounds that were completely undignified. They managed approximately 3 meters before the whole enterprise tipped sideways and deposited both of them onto the soft October grass in a heap of arms and bicycle in total collapse. Noah burst out laughing, the full, helpless, whole-body laugh of a child who has lost all composure and does not care at all. Marcus lay on the grass looking up at the gold October sky, and he started laughing too. Not the polished version of laughter he used at events. Not the managed chuckle of a public man performing ease. He laughed the way he hadn't laughed in years, from somewhere real, from somewhere that had nothing to do with how it looked. In the kitchen window above them, Camille appeared. She looked down at her son and his father lying in the yard next to a bicycle, both of them helpless, the afternoon light covering everything gold. She stood at the window, and she let herself feel it. Not the complicated parts, not the 7 years of history, not the weight of what had been done and who had done it and what it had cost. Just this exact moment, her son laughing in the yard, his father beside him, the porch step repaired, the gate hanging straight, everything that had almost never been, everything that was. She pressed her hand flat against the warm glass and smiled. There were still difficult days. Days when Noah would ask questions that didn't have answers that fully fit. Days when Marcus's mother called on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, and they both moved carefully around what sat between them. There had been one conversation, short, in the front room of the Habersham Roadhouse, where Eleanor had asked in a voice Marcus had never heard her use before, smaller and older than her normal voice, whether she might come to the West End one Saturday, whether that might be possible, whether Noah might, eventually on, want to meet her. Marcus had said he would ask Camille. He had asked Camille. Camille had been quiet for a long moment and then said, "Not yet, but maybe." And that maybe coming from Camille meant something. It meant the door was not shut. None of it was resolved cleanly. None of it would be. If real things don't resolve cleanly, they settle into a shape that is workable, and sometimes, on good days, something more than workable. On a Sunday morning in the 7th month, Marcus arrived at the West End house before Noah was fully awake. He had a key now. Camille had taken it from the hook by the door one Wednesday evening without ceremony and held it out. "So you don't have to knock," she'd said. He had taken it, and it had sat in his jacket pocket for 2 days before he could bring himself to put it on his keychain. It weighed more than metal. He let himself in quietly, put the coffee on, sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, working through something he'd been thinking about for the campaign. Noah appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, pajamas, hair exactly sideways, in the specific, unfocused expression of someone whose brain is still 3 minutes behind his body. He looked at Marcus, looked at the coffee already made, looked at the notebook. "You're here early," the boy said. "Couldn't sleep," Marcus said. Noah came and sat across from him, looked at the notebook. "Is that for the Senate?" "Yes." Noah poured himself a glass of juice from the jug Marcus had put on the table, took a sip. "Are you going to win?" Marcus looked at him. "I intend to." "Good," Noah said, with the complete decisiveness of a 7-year-old who has made up his mind about something and considers the matter settled. He looked out the window at the yard, where the bicycle leaned against the back fence. Then he looked back at Marcus with the expression Marcus had come to recognize as the precursor to a request that had been in preparation for some time. "Dad," he said. "Yeah." "Can we get a dog?" Marcus looked at him. Noah's face was a masterpiece of practiced innocence, completely transparent to anyone paying attention, which Marcus absolutely was. "Does your mother know you're asking me this?" Marcus said. A small pause. "She said it was something you should weigh in on." "She said it was my decision, specifically?" Noah's mouth twitched. "She said you should be consulted." Marcus looked at the boy across the table. Noah looked back at him with the full force of 7-year-old directness and complete unblinking confidence. "That," Marcus said, "is not what she said." Noah's composure broke and the grin came. That full, a bright, completely unguarded grin that Marcus had decided was one of the best things he had ever seen. And he said very confidently, "But you're thinking about it." Marcus shook his head, but the smile that had been sitting on his face for the last 30 seconds was going absolutely nowhere. "I can work with thinking about it," Noah announced, already planning, already satisfied with this as an opening position. He reached for the juice again, the matter apparently progressing according to his expectations. From upstairs, the sound of Camille's alarm, then footsteps, then the tap, then the sounds of the house waking all the way up. In a few minutes, she would come downstairs and find the two of them at her kitchen table in the Sunday morning light. And she would put the kettle on because nobody had noticed hers was cold. And she would look at her son and the man who had found his way, late, imperfect, but finally and completely, to this table. And she would let herself feel the things she had started, slowly, carefully, to allow herself to feel. The fragile, complicated, entirely real thing. That this, against everything, despite everything, because of everything, was enough. More than enough. Everything. Outside, the morning moved through the West End street the way mornings do. Someone was opening their front door. A dog was walking a man down the sidewalk. 2 children on bicycles were negotiating their route for the day. The porch step held firm. The wind chime turned once in a small breeze, and the red bicycle leaned against the back fence, still standing, still red, still waiting for the next loop around the yard, as it always had, as it always would. Hope you enjoyed watching as much as I love creating. If this touched your heart, please kindly like, share, and subscribe. Comment below where you are watching from. Thank you, and see you in the next video.